This is Flock and Hive, a place to explore the things you always wanted to know more about, as well as the things you didn't know you wanted to know. And this week,
I have no issues with people saying to me, I actually just wanted to connect with my mum. And I'll be like, okay, cool, well, let me see if I can tap into that for you. I'm really open to that. I only like to start going with the flow because I think it's just a really nice way of starting your reading. I think that the more you can just have your mind open to what's going to come through and try not to direct the narrative so much, you might actually get more out of it than what you think.
We speak to psychic medium Jessica Lynne.
hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Hello.
We've been blown away by your responses, so thank you very much for that. Now, this week we are talking to Jessica Lynne. She is a psychic medium. And it is, once again, an intriguing conversation that in some ways, I think, throws up more questions than it answers.
It's constantly throwing up questions. I even submitted some questions for you to ask her, didn't I? And even after the interview, I'm still like, I need to know more.
Yes, well, me too. And she was kind enough actually to give me a reading. She did a reading for me like the week before that we spoke, which sort of gave me a good basis to ask her a lot of these questions as well. But I must say, I really needed to take the time to process what she was saying and to listen while I was editing. And things are a lot clearer now. In fact, I think there are some things, or one thing that I would like to say before actually we play the whole conversation, because it might make a little bit more sense.
Are you saying that you struggled and you wanted to take the time to process because you were coming from slightly a more of a, for want of a better word, skeptical view? So you wanted to kind of give her the space to kind of prove you wrong?
That's exactly it. So I found Jess online. She's got a brilliant Instagram at Jessica Lynne Mediumship, and she's Australian. She's young. She's like full of life, but she's also fascinatingly no bullshit. She comes across as just really straight talking. She's clearly had quite a hard upbringing and a hard life. So I thought she'd be the perfect person for us to talk to about all of this stuff, because she'd give us a very straight down the line answer, which she absolutely did.
Yeah, I mean, we'll hear it in a minute, but it was mainly towards the end where the way she wrapped it up in a way that I've never heard mediumship being presented before, which has actually changed my view quite significantly. So it's worth, even if you're really cynical about these things, I definitely think it's worth listening to this interview, because there's no expectation for you to necessarily even believe in anything. So just, I think hearing what she has to say is just a way of opening your mind to the possibilities a bit more.
Yes, because chances are, if you're listening to this, you're just like us. We struggle with getting to grips with it, but we desperately want to believe it and throw ourselves into readings. Just we need to be taken on a journey to get there.
I think for me particularly, my first experience of even thinking about life after death was unfortunately as a child through the lens of horror and ghost stories. So I think for most people, there's already a subconscious aversion to even going there. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm pretty sure, well, I wouldn't say you showed me my first horror movie. I probably snuck in whilst you were having a teenager sleepover. But April Fool's Day, was it April Fool's or April, that horror film? I can see so specifically one scene. It has stayed with me my whole life.
Da 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 da. Kathy, it's Marty. Marty. Yeah. Do you remember? Yeah.
Yes. Was that film?
Yes. And then we made our own horror movie version of that with my friend Sam at the time, and we brought you in to be part of that.
I remember. I'm remembering that. And I can see it. We've got it on film. It's in our loft. That's a buried memory for some reason. I wonder why. Trauma of, the occult.
Oh, it was not. The way we did it was not that. And in typical kid fashion, we got very bored after about 10 minutes and went on to something else, and we started making adverts.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we made adverts for like Spot Cream, and it had 3 different names for it within that one advert because we hadn't prepared.
Always prepare your Spot Cream branding,
Yes.
which was apt because both very spotty.
Oi! Well, yeah, actually. Shall we do the word of the week? Can I bring it in?
What it is.
What it is? Well, the particular word is, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Cryptesthesia. Have you heard of it?
Yes, I use it every day. No. Though crypto to me means like crypt, dead and buried.
No, actually, crypto means hidden, hence cryptocurrency. You can't see it. Duh, another thing I
Ah,
hadn't quite realized. Anesthesia, which again is pertaining to sensation or perception. So, cryptesthesia describes a type of ESP, so which is extrasensory perception, which is where someone is able to gain knowledge without using the common senses that we're aware of. So it's perceived by the mind directly without going through the eyes or touch or smell or anything like that.
right. Basically, Jessica has cryptesthesia. I can't say it.
Cryptesthesia. But yeah, so it encompasses a wide range of things, which include clairvoyance, which is, seeing into the future, or telepathy, or knowing things before they happen. They all come under that umbrella of cryptesthesia.
So it's quite nice that things like that are labeled, because back in the day it would have just been like witchy craziness.
Yes, that's exactly it. And there is a word that I would really love us to shout about because it encompasses all of those things. And we've almost mentioned it in previous podcasts, but now is the time. And that is noetic, and the term noetic science.
So I'm aware of its headline, which is essentially where science and spirituality meet. And what's really useful about this, especially ahead of the conversation we have with Jessica, is that it legitimizes this whole theory, the whole fact that it creates a space for mediumship. It labels it, it says it exists. And that's what I like about the whole premise of noetic science. It kind of gives space for something that is invisible. Like I think you've said to me before, a perfect example is love. We know it exists, we feel it, but you don't see it.
And what I particularly love about the noetic science phrase, as it were, it was that it was founded by an astronaut, right, Mr. Edgar Mitchell, and this was right way back in the 70s, who founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences after he'd been out in space, because he had really experienced some other stuff, basically, and he wanted to understand the nature of consciousness and its interaction with the whole universe. So this has come from a scientific place. I mean, there is no one more elite, both physically and mentally, that we are led to believe, than an astronaut. And yet he wanted to bring the world's attention to what is an interdisciplinary field that bridges the gap between science and spiritual inquiry, which incorporates all kinds of things like psychology, physics, philosophy, but also spirituality. It's exploring it and saying that yes, there is other. We just can't define it in a traditionally scientific way.
I love the word interdisciplinary, because that is what I've been trying to get my head around. I'm reading Synchro Destiny by Deepak Chopra at the moment, and he talks about the quantum domain, which is that we are all in essence the same energetic waveforms, but in different mass. It's going back to Barry Smith and his senses. We have more than the five. If we are just existing on the five senses plane, we're just not tapping in to all the other stuff underneath. And physics is being talked about in the realm of spirituality, and that's exactly what Deepak Chopra does, bringing those two things together, the interdisciplinary. So that kind of supports that, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. But on that note, shall we dive into a little bit of cryptesthesia?
Yes.
So without further ado, here is the conversation that we had with Jessica Lynne. Jess, thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me today and being so open to answer so many questions, because believe me, there are so many questions here.
I know. I'm so excited to be here.
I would just like to start by asking what it means to be a medium, because I'm sure there are so many misconceptions about that. And then I want to hear all about you and your story and how you got here.
Yes, I am a psychic medium, so I communicate with your loved ones on the other side. I guess people ask this a lot, like, what's a psychic? What's a medium? What's the difference? We don't really know. So a psychic is somebody who can pick up on your energy and sort of what's going around you at the moment and give you advice about what's going to come for your future. And mediums connect with the other side. So I do both. So while I'm connecting with spirit, I start picking up on things around you and what's going on. And spirit helped me to sort of, I guess, lead the way in terms of giving you the advice that you need at that particular time and that moment. I've always been very intuitive. I've always just had something going on, and I just didn't really know the extent of it or what to do with that. So this is from a really young age. Like when I was a teenager, I started feeling and sensing things and had a really strong intuition and gut instinct. But it wasn't until my nana passed away when I was 12. That I started to, I guess, be a little bit more curious about what this is all about. I tried to see signs and symbols and try and see if she was trying to connect with me. And it wasn't foreign to me thinking this way because my family are quite open to spirituality and they're a bit hippie. And so some people go, oh my God, 12, how would you have known? But it's just sort of what I've always known to be true. So I started looking for signs, and I used to sit with her. My nana got cremated, and she had an ashes box, and it was a wooden box, and I used to sit with that and just talk to it. And one day I started noticing that it had a really distinctive, like, wooden smell that was really sweet, and I'm like, oh, that's a really nice smell. And whenever I would walk past it, that smell would come, and I'm like, that's so strange. Like, I'm over near the box right now. And then that continued, and I used to test it out. I used to like sit with it, and I would like rub the box a little bit, and I'd be like, oh yeah, the smell's starting to come. And so then I started associating this smell with my nana, and then I started smelling it when I wasn't even at home. So I'd be in the supermarket walking down the street, and this wooden smell would like come over me really quickly, and so quick that you couldn't even take a minute to acknowledge. You're just like, oh my God, I just smelled that, and it's just gone. And I thought, oh my God, this is my way of connecting with her. How cool is this that we've created this symbol together? Um, but it wasn't until like I was in my 20s where I was starting to go to psychic festivals and mind body spirit festivals and seeing every psychic medium that I could ever find, and doing meditation classes. And this is how I sort of started to get into this. But one particular psychic medium that I saw was like, Jess, why are you here? And I'm like, what do you mean? She goes, you should be able to do this. You should be able to turn this on and off like a light switch. And I'm like, well, how? Like, what are you talking about? And it wasn't until I actually saw another medium that I actually really loved, and I noticed that she did classes, that I was like, okay, I really feel really strongly with this particular medium because she's super direct, really blunt, and just gives the information just how you would want it very clearly. And I thought, I need to learn from this lady because she's my style. So I started doing her classes. I did her intermediate class. I was mentored by her for years and did free readings for anyone that would let me. And yeah, fast forward to now, and I've got my business and I'm in it full time, and it's just been a wild ride.
Yeah. My goodness. It sounds like it. So did you know instantly in that moment when they said you should be able to do this, you're like, this is what I want to do? Or were you there because you were toying with the idea of doing it anyway? And were you there because you wanted to speak to people on the other side?
Yeah, I was there just like as a client. Like, I just want to connect with my nana. I want to know, but I was so curious as to how can I do that? Like, how can I talk to her without you, kind of thing. But it wasn't like, it was still a couple years later before I even found that other medium. So it wasn't like I went from that session and then started trying to do everything. I was still, it was just a seed that I guess that spirit planted in my head in that moment, going, maybe this is for you one day, but we'll see. So yeah, so interesting.
It really is. So you talk about talking to spirit. Is that like one spirit guide, or is that a term for everyone that you speak to who's passed over?
Everyone. I actually get this question a lot. They're like,
Ah,
what do you mean by spirit or spirits? Or what does that actually mean? So for me, when I say spirit, I mean the spiritual, the other side, everyone on the other side. So it's just sort of like a collective term that I use, and many other mediums use as well. Sometimes we'll say, we can communicate with spirits, which I guess is similar. I guess we're talking about the same sort of thing. It's just, I guess, how people word it. I like to say spirit because I think it
mm.
just sounds nicer.
And do you hear these voices like voices in your head? Are they your voice, sort of like another version of you, or are they different voices?
It's my voice. And this is where it gets really confusing. And when
Yeah.
people start out, they're like, is this just me? Am I crazy? Am I like trying to come up with all these things to say? And the way that I differentiate when spirit are talking to me and when it's my own logical mind is it's actually why I started scribbling when I read for people. So
Mhm.
I get a pen and paper, and I'm not really thinking about it. My hand is just going and I'm just scribbling as I'm reading. And it's, I guess, a way of my logical mind to be doing something while my other part of my brain is staying with spirit, trying to get all the information. So that's how I differentiate it, because I'm like, my logical mind needs something to do because we can prioritize. So I'm like, if it's just focusing on what my hand is doing with my pen, then there's no room for me to be analyzing anything. All I can be doing is just be open to whatever I'm receiving in that moment. So it's super cool.
Yeah, you very kindly did a reading for me, and I noticed it was very fast scribbling. It's not like doodling, is it? That would
No.
require some sort of form of, I don't know, mental capacity there. But just, I can see why that would work. Are there any other techniques that you use like that, or that you've heard that people do?
Yeah. So, also something that I like to do is the way that I prepare for readings is really in depth and very, I guess, particular to the person that is reading for you as well. So, everyone has their rituals or how they prepare. For me, I like to call in my grandparents who are on the other side to help me to connect with people and to connect with spirits on the other side. I guess for me, part of my ritual is opening myself up to the spirit world and asking them to remove my essence. So I actually picture like the middle of my body and I picture like, I guess, near where your belly button is. And I do this thing where I breathe in and then I breathe out. And you'll probably notice when I read for you that I do that. I breathe in and then I breathe out. It's actually me thinking about the essence of me being removed from my body. So it's almost like I'm ready for spirit to take over my body and I'm no longer myself. So that's my way of indicating to them that I'm ready to play and they can do whatever they need to do to my body to make me feel and sense the things that I need to know to be able to deliver the messages.
And does that form a sort of protection as well, or do you need to do other things to protect yourself? Like, does any bad energy kind of want to jump in there, for example?
Yeah, so the way that I prepare, and I basically open up this portal to the spirit world, and I only ask that spirit step forward with the highest level of love and compassion. So I don't really entertain any negative energy. People say that too. They're like, oh my God, what if we get bad spirits? Or what if someone comes who I don't want to talk to and they were mean? And I'm like, don't worry, we won't get those people because I just don't allow it. But I use a lot of crystals. I use a lot of essential oils, like frankincense is amazing for protection. So I'm pretty much 99% bulletproof when I come through for you and read for you. I think sometimes if it's a really heavy reading, you can carry a little bit of residual energy from that, and that's just so normal. But the way that I use my Palo Santo and my protection spray and everything, it kind of just goes after you've
Mhm.
done all of that stuff. So, yeah.
Is there a maximum amount of readings you can do in one period of time?
Yeah, well, for me, I think I'm still trying to work out my maximum. I basically do 6 a day, sometimes 7. Seven's probably my capacity. Like I'm starting to hit that. Oh, goodness, that's a lot. But my readings are 40 minutes and it's about 50-minute investment of my mental capacity. So I think that that's kind of like a normal day that people would have if they were going to work. So I kind of like to think of it like that. I tend to do about 3 in a row is probably my maximum, and then I need a little bit of a break, because it's just a lot of energy and
Mm.
dipping in and out of people's energy all the time. But it's weird because when I was reading part-time, my capacity was a lot less because I wasn't, like, exercising the muscle, I guess you could say. So the more that I've been doing it and now that I'm doing it full-time, I'm actually really shocked at how, like, long I can read for and how many people and it just, yeah, it's almost like the more you use it, the more that it kind of just works.
So does it all come quicker as well? So the preparation doesn't take as long. You can almost just switch it on.
Yeah, I used to need about 10 minutes to prep. Now I can prep in about 3,
Yeah.
which is
Wow.
so interesting because I was like, oh my God, I need all this time. And I was super stressed out about it. And sometimes it's like 2 minutes too. And I'm like, oh God, better start prepping. And it just kind of happens. But because I'm doing it so often, it's almost like you're like, yep, okay. It kind of is like that light switch, I guess, after all.
I guess 10,000 hours, isn't it?
Yes.
One question that I know lots of people would want to ask is, this is all about energy, and I understand energy. I struggle with the concept of doing it over Zoom. Can you tell me how that works? How can you check into somebody's energy while you're on the other side of the world, like we are, for example.
Yeah, a lot of people think that. They're like, oh no, I need a reading in person or it's not going to be as good or I just don't get how it's going to work. For me, I actually learnt remotely. So the way that I've always read for people is like this. And I can read in person and I do that a lot too, but I just find that online it's actually it's quite good for both of us because you're in an environment where you feel relaxed. So you're going to be a little bit more open to receiving messages because you're in the space of your own car or your own house and you're not in a foreign environment where you're like, oh my God, I don't think I can be vulnerable here. I don't feel comfortable. So there's like a comfort level to it as well. But for me, energy isn't bound by location or time or anything like that. The spirit world is sort of, it's everywhere. And your guides and your loved ones are going to follow you wherever you go. So they're going to want to talk to me and connect with you and they're just going to make it work. So it kind of just it works the same way for me. I actually don't feel like anyone has more of a powerful reading if they're sitting with me than if they were online. So yeah, it's really fascinating, but we just don't need to be in the same room for it to happen and spirit work wonders.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is it more intense if you're actually in the room with somebody? But obviously not
Mm.
necessarily. Has anything strange happened while you've been in a room with someone doing a reading? I asked just because I wasn't having a reading once, but I was talking to a therapist about my ancestors and some strange things happened. So yeah, can you give us some
Ah,
examples of
wow.
anything like that?
Yeah, so I was actually reading for a lady and I was picking up on something. I'm like, oh, I think that I think it was her father that had passed. And I said, he always stands at your back door. Like, I don't know, I just keep seeing him stand at the back door. He goes in and out of the door a lot. It just feels like it's significant. And she goes, oh, yeah, he used to do that all the time. And all of a sudden, her dog started barking. And we were like, oh, she goes, oh, it's so annoying. He's always barking. And then she goes, oh, just give me a minute. I'll just see what he's doing. And he was literally sitting at the back door, just barking and looking up in the air. And we were like, oh my God. Like he's literally obviously standing there right now to like validate for me that I'm not crazy picking up on this information. And the dog was there like telling us he's there right now. It's just crazy, but so awesome.
Yeah, I'd love to hear some more validation stories if you've got any. Cool.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Oh my gosh. Actually, I want to tell you about this story because this is a bit of a freaky one, actually. So there was this lady that I was reading for, and her mother had passed away, like really tragically. And this is really messed up stuff, but her mum actually was in a relationship with someone, and she ended up taking his life, which is this is horrific. I'm reading for someone right now, finding out all this information. Like I was a bit like deer in headlights. Wow, this is full on. It's like movie style stuff. And then I found out that her mother then had taken her life. So it was a super tragic like scenario. Her mum wasn't a very, you know, mentally well person. But I actually was connecting with the father or the stepfather who had passed and been murdered. And he was beautiful. His energy was so lovely. And it was just such a beautiful way of him letting her know that she's okay or that he's okay. But then after the reading, because I didn't really entertain the woman that was there because I could feel her, but I was like, I'm not sure about this energy of you. I'm going to kind of park you for a minute. And then after the reading, I had all this weird stuff start to happen to me. And I was like, I don't know what's going on here, but I feel really heavy. I feel like I'm a bit toey in my house. I'm like, it just feels bloody weird in here. And I really didn't think anything of it. I'm like, oh, obviously I just need to cleanse my house or whatever. And then I ended up having an an episode where I was asleep in bed and it was like 5 o'clock in the morning and like my wife had gone to work because I heard her get up. And then all of a sudden I felt something. I felt this like someone walking into the room. And I was like, that's weird. Like she's gone. Like this is not normal. And I thought, oh, I'll just lay here and stop in my imagination. And then I felt someone breathe on my neck. And I was like, what is this? I just was still. You know when you get frozen when you're scared? And then I felt this like nail like go down my back. And I was like, this is not normal. And then I felt this like I don't know, this energy or this hand just like go around my waist. And I was like, Jess, it's now or never. You have to grab this person right now so you can run the hell out of here, or bad shit's going to happen. So I went to grab the arm and like turn around, and then there was nothing there. And
Oh.
I was like, oh my God, this is like an entity or something that is in my house that is making me feel like there's someone in my room. And it's interesting because that's my worst nightmare. It's almost like they got into my brain and thought, what is your worst nightmare? My worst nightmare is someone coming into my house doing that, right?
Right.
So they were playing on that in my mind. And I'm like, oh no, there's someone here. This is no good. So I ended up having to use everything that I could think of to get rid of this entity, all my sage and Palo Santo and all the things. And I think that I got it away. But when I went to my kinesiologist, she's like, oh, Jess, it's still sort of stuck to you, like right on the outskirts. So she ended up putting lime on my feet and it instantly took it away. And this is why now I am telling everybody to put lime in your room, because lime is a beautiful cleansing agent to rid negative fear-based energies, any spirits that don't belong in your home. It is actual genius. So when I left her, she's like, oh, maybe just like play around with limes. And I thought, I'm just going to cut one up, put it in my room because I'm bloody scared. And nothing's happened since.
Wow. And I've seen on Instagram you talking about limes and seeing people who have tried it themselves
And it
and just saying,
works. And
and it
kids are
works.
sleeping now. All these
Yeah.
kids who have had nightmares and night terrors for years are sleeping. All these adults are having like really beautiful sleeps. Like it's actually genius. So that's why I told you that story, because I'm like, I went through a really shitty experience, but on the end of it, I've been able to find this like tool that now is helping so many people to get restful sleep and feel really comfortable in their homes. So it's amazing.
Lime, though. I mean, who knew citrus fruit? That's
I know.
amazing.
Yeah.
No, I love that. Speaking of negative entities, how do you feel about talking about your family?
Yeah, I'm really open to that for sure.
Mm. Because I haven't managed to find. I know that you've talked about it openly on your Instagram, but I haven't managed to find
Mm.
something about your sister. Are you happy to talk about that?
Yeah, yeah. So my sister passed away when she was 27, turning 28. Um, our relationship was always very up and down. She wasn't always the nicest person. She was very mentally unwell, and she did a lot of really random things. It's almost like she was a bit of a product of our environment, of where we grew up. So I grew up in a really um, interesting home, drugs, alcohol, all the things. And I decided to remove myself from that space. So I went and lived with my granddad. So when my nana passed away, I sort of moved in with him. So I was only 13. So at that point of time, I kind of knew that this was not for me. But my sister decided to stay, and she really ended up a lot like them. Um, she she had a baby, and then she was pregnant again, but she got pregnant very soon after she had her first one, and she didn't look after herself a lot. She took medication and still smoked and drank randomly, and she had prem babies, and her body was just not in a great way, and she got pregnant too soon after her first, and she ended up losing that baby, but at the same time, she had a placenta tear. And so her placenta teared and she couldn't clot her own blood, and the baby had passed away. And then she ended up also passing away. And it was weird because when she died, we were actually in an okay place. Like, we really were good. I remember trying to save her. Like, I put crystals all over her body, and I was trying to ask spirit to do what they can to bring her back and to have her be lucid again. And nothing I did worked. And so I felt a bit helpless in that moment. But it wasn't until she passed away. It was a few days, and I was like, oh, I was really grieving her. I felt really terrible. But then all this weird shit started happening to our house, like really strange. Like, our gas stove, like, electrocuted my wife multiple times. She got all these blood noses. A lot of things were happening to her. And it was weird because when I was talking to my family, they all started getting blood noses as well. and we don't know why. It was really strange. Everyone just started getting them. And then one day my wife woke me up and she's like, "Oh my God." And I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "Your sister just dropped this ball on me." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" So I literally looked in our bed and there was my exercise ball, like, you know, the ones that you roll on, like if you got a sore back. So there was
They're
this
huge.
yeah, this blue hard ball in our bed. And it was in my wardrobe behind the door. So you would have heard the door open if anyone had have gone to get it. We didn't hear that. So my sister, her spirit, stood above Jade and held the ball up. And so Jade opened her eyes and saw my sister's face smile, and then she dropped it on her face. Physically, the physical ball was in our bed. It was crazy. And that's when I'm like, oh, Jade's like, "I'm telling you, she's haunting us. She's haunting all of us." And I used to feel this presence behind my back door. And I was like, there's something there. Like, ever since she's passed, I just don't even want to walk there. Like, I'm a bit scared at night to walk near that door. It's like she was sort of hanging around there. I thought at the time someone was hanging around there. I didn't realize it was her. But I didn't really believe Jade. I was like, oh, surely it's just your imagination, whatever. It wasn't until one night that I heard this big bang, and it was really early in the morning. And I was like, what the fuck was that? So I walk out, and our front door is wide open. And we have like 3 deadlocks on our door. There is no way that that door can be open. And so, and the dog was just staring like outside and like was barking. I'm like, okay. So I quickly like shut the door and lock it. And then I run into my room. And then I see like the outside light go off. And so I open the curtain to have a look out the front, and yeah, the sensor light's gone off, and then it went off again. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And then it came on again. I'm like, there's got to be somebody out there. This is ridiculous. Then all of a sudden, my car door, like my car unlocks itself and then locks itself again and does that like 3 times. I am nowhere near the keys. I'm like, this
Oh.
is bizarre. I'm like, all right, I'm sold. She's haunting us. And there were so many stories of other people in the family who have had like taps at their window at night and her yelling in their ears and like their names in their ears at night. And then I think it was the next day I woke up because I heard and felt this, like right next to my face, I heard this whole and I was like, oh, nah. I'm like, I've got to get her out of here. This is just so bad. So I had to literally remove my sister's spirit from my home, which was a time, I'm telling you, because she was so persistent. And this is why I'm so glad, because I tried everything: salt, crystal, sage, palo santo, chanting, anything I could find to get rid of her, and nothing worked. It would work for a little bit and then she would come back again. So limes has been the only thing that has worked to keep her spirit out. So, yeah, guys, I'm telling you, lime is a thing.
Time for a margarita, I think.
Literally.
Oh my goodness. So can Jade, your wife, does she have the gift as well, or if that's what you call it?
um, she's very in tune and very open now that obviously she's with me, and she can read the room really well. But no, she doesn't have the same ability as what I do. But it's just so interesting that like my sister could tap into her and have her see her. Like that would have taken a lot of effort on my sister's part, because it takes a lot for them to be able to physically like affect our environment. And this is why if people are like, oh my God, my keys were on the floor and I think it was my dad's spirit and blah, blah, blah. It's like, it probably was. And do you know how much effort that would have taken for him to do that? So I think that people underestimate how hard spirit tried to connect with us, good or bad.
Yeah. Oh my goodness me. I've seen her in some of your videos, and one of the questions I've been asked to ask you is, does it affect the reading if somebody else is in the room with you, or is it or distracting? You know, does it just make no difference at all?
It doesn't really make a difference to me. I think it's actually been so good because I've had to get used to reading with noise, and because Jade's always running around the house and using the blower and friggin' vacuuming and all sorts of things, and I just have to like remove the noise. So I don't need to be in a completely quiet environment. Like a lot of the time I'm reading for people and their kids are in the background, or like people are coming in interrupting, and it's just, it doesn't really bother me. So it's kind of good that I've got a really crazy wife that does all these things, because it's made me be a better medium.
Fair enough. Oh my goodness. I saw a story actually on Instagram that you put about connecting with someone who was still alive, but mentally a bit in and out. So I think it was a lady with Alzheimer's. Can you tell me about that?
Yes. So I connected with my client who had her grandmother at the time, yes, had Alzheimer's. And it's so interesting when this happens because the spirits step forward, or the souls of people step forward the same way. So it's hard for me to differentiate sometimes whether somebody's still alive or they've passed away and what energy I'm picking up on, because it comes through all of the same. But we worked out that it was her grandmother who is still here with us, which is so fascinating. And the reason why souls can connect in this way is because when their minds are in a bit of a wandering state, they really go between this world and the other side. And I think it's really their way of, I guess, coming to terms with the fact that they are going to pass over at some point in time. And I think also it's quite comforting for them because they can see their loved ones and know that even though they can't communicate here in the physical world, that they're still able to communicate in some way with somebody. And that's with the people that have already passed on. So sometimes spirits step forward like this, or souls step forward to basically let us know that they're okay, and to give us comfort in knowing that even though they look like that they're suffering and they're not okay in that moment, and we might think, oh, I feel so bad, they feel so tortured in their own mind right now, they're actually at peace. And I know that's really interesting and weird to say, but from our human perspective, we're looking at them going, oh my gosh, they're suffering and it's being dragged out and they're deteriorating. And yes, that may look like the case, but really internally, their minds are wandering around and they're watching over us and they know everything that's going on. So if people are like, oh, mum's in the home, she doesn't really know that we're not going to see her, that's all right. Your mum knows, just as a heads up.
Oh, right. It is
Yes.
comforting though, isn't it? I think
Mhm.
for us as well, but knowing that if we start to deteriorate and have those problems ourselves, that actually maybe it isn't as terrible to go through it as it can look like from the outside.
It's
Hopefully.
definitely not. It's not. And I think that we might think, oh, I never want to be like that, just trapped in my own mind and can't communicate with anyone. And this is why I think that the other side, open your mind up so that you can travel and you can talk and communicate, and just in a different way, I guess. So you're definitely not, it's not as bad as what it may seem.
Well, let's hope not. Is there an element in what you do where you can predict anything that may be in someone's immediate future or in the distant future, or is that just a myth?
Oh, of course, yes. This is why I like to bring spirit forward during my readings, and I don't solely work as a psychic, because I like to tap into your loved ones and sort of see what they're seeing for you, because they're so invested in you and your journey. And a lot of the time, I predict pregnancies. Like spirit will be holding the souls of these children on the other side for you before they come here, which is so lovely. So I was actually reading for somebody the other day and I was like, oh my gosh, I keep seeing this like little soul around you and it keeps circling you over and over again. And I feel like you're going to have this like third child. And she's like, oh my God, yeah, I'm pregnant. I'm like, well, that's why I see this little soul here. And I gave her a timeline and she's like, yep, that makes complete sense. This is when I'm due. And I also tapped into the fact that I knew that she was going to name it after this person that's on the other side. And she's like, yeah, that's what we're thinking of doing. So it's just so interesting how it's just, I don't know, spirit just know things. And I really like when they drop the mic and they give us this little insider info. They don't like to tell us everything, but it's just nice to know that there's some hope there, I guess. A lot of the time, too, if people are single, I'll pick up on, I might actually say, oh, are you with somebody right now? I keep seeing someone stand right beside you. And they'll be like, no, I'm single. I'm like, okay, not for long. I'm like, I already feel like they're coming. And I give them timelines and what the person's like. And it's just a way of spirit letting you know that you're not going to be alone and giving you hope in knowing that you're going to find this person. It's just a matter of divine timing.
I love that. So if you're aware of somebody standing next to somebody, is there an element of being able to tell whether they're tall or short or get any kind of physical characteristics at all, or is it just ether?
Yeah, well, a lot of the time I pick up on personality more so than what they look like. Sometimes I can pick up if they've got darker features or if they have a particular, I don't know, personality that lends itself more to a particular culture or something like that. But yeah, it's really weird. For me, I don't really ask for a lot of physical characteristics unless there's something really specific that somebody like would remember about somebody or would really notice with someone, because I think a lot of the time people change their physical appearance so much that if I was like, oh, your mum's coming through with blonde hair or whatever, and they're like, oh, not really, I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe they had blonde hair and they had brown hair and you know them most of their life with brown, but they want to be remembered with blonde. Like, it's just not significant enough for me to say it. So yeah.
Okay. Right. So I'm sure you get this question all the time, but when loved ones who have died say they are still with you, can they see you do your private things? Can they see you have a poo or have sex?
No. That is not a thing. I actually get asked this a lot. They're like, "Oh my god, can you imagine?" I'm like, "I'm telling you, they are not interested in any of that." I feel like that there must be some sort of like barrier that goes up going, "No-go zone right now."
Like a soul contract or something. I think I've heard something about that. Can anyone develop the ability to communicate with the dead, or is it a special gift?
I do not think I'm a chosen one. And that's something that I really hold true to my heart. I just think that it takes, I guess, the curiosity. I think anyone really has the ability to connect with the other side. It's just how open you are to that. And the more that you sort of sit with it and the more open you are. And if you see signs, you don't think it's just a coincidence, you sort of like acknowledge to spirit, I saw that. Yeah, I think that that actually did happen. I think that they then see that you're open to it more so when you just embrace it and you don't question it. And then they try to connect with you more because you become open to it. It takes a lot of dedication, a lot of practice. It's something that it's kind of like fine tuning a skill. It's just like anything. It'd be like not everyone wants to be a doctor. Not everyone wants to spend years and years like dedicating their life to studying and knowing all the different parts. And it's the same kind of concept. It just depends how much you want it.
No, I guess. Can you generally communicate with any kind of spirit? The ones that you choose to, or sometimes is it just like it just doesn't happen?
99% of the time, I'm able to connect with who you would like to connect with. In my readings, I really like to go with the flow first and just see what comes through naturally. But then later on, if I haven't connected to the person that you would like to communicate with, we can try and go directly. Obviously, it's not dial a spirit, so I can't guarantee that we get people that you want, but I do try my best. And a lot of the time, they want to show up for you anyway.
Oh, that's good. Have you had any clients try and trick you?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
How did you do
I know
that?
it's yeah, it's really difficult. And you know what I say to that? Like I actually had somebody the reading was really great and then halfway through I started picking up on this relationship energy and I was like, I feel like that you've tried to break cycles in your relationships. I feel like that you the person that you've been with in the past or the person that's most recently been with you is like this and like that, and I think we need to move through this energy and whatever it might be. And she was like kind of nodding. And then the energy shifted. And then she's like, yeah, 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 yep. And I'm like, okay, weird. Anyway, so the reading ended and she messaged me. She's like, oh, I just didn't really resonate with that last part. And I was like, okay. I'm like, well, what do you mean? And she goes, oh, well, I'm married. I'm with someone. I've been married with him for a while. We're about to have a baby. And I wanted you to tell me the sex of my baby. And I'm like, okay. And I said, but if we go back to the start of your relationship with this person, is that how it felt? Like you were kind of trying to communicate better and you were trying to work on it because you thought you had something. And she goes, oh, yeah, right at the start. And I'm like, well, then why didn't you tell me that's not where we are right now? But I understand that because that's how we started our relationship, because that would have just changed the whole trajectory of the reading. And then I could have tapped into what you wanted me to tap into. But if you lie to me, you're stunting your own reading. You're ruining it for yourself. So you're better off telling me, no, that doesn't make sense. Or I can kind of see that and just be honest, because I'm just going with whatever I'm feeling. And it's really, Like, it's a dance here. You've got to acknowledge things because I'm not going to understand everything. I have no context. All I have is just information. You've got to make sense of it for me. So I think if you come into it with an open mind and you are really honest with what's resonating and with what's not resonating, you're going to have the best reading if you're just open and honest with me.
Okay. Is there anything that we haven't spoken about that you would really like our listeners to know about being a medium, what it is, what it isn't, how to get the best out of a reading, etc., other than to just be open to it? Anything
Yeah.
else?
I think that a lot of the time people come in to readings and they have, one particular person they want to connect with, or they have one particular message that they want to receive, and they're so fixated on it. And I get that 100%. But I also think that that sort of blocks you from maybe other spirits that want to step forward for you. You might be like, oh, I don't know anyone like that, or I don't know anyone like that. And I'm like, hang on. I'm like, there's got to be somebody that this fits with, even if you didn't know them here. And then later on, they're like, oh, yeah, I knew who that was. It's just I so wanted to connect with this person that I just wasn't thinking about it. And it's like, okay, well, if we were open to it, then we could have gone, cool, well, this person's stepping forward for you. What's the message they have for you? And then let's move forward and see if your mum's here. So I think that a lot of people just need to be able to sort of go with the flow of it. And I have no issues with people saying to me, I actually just wanted to connect with my mum, or I really
Right.
just wanted to know about this. And I'll be like, okay, cool. Well, let me see if I can tap into that for you. I'm really open to that. I only like to start going with the flow because I think it's just a really nice way of starting your reading rather than coming at spirit, asking for things straight away. We allow them to bring in what you might need to hear that you don't think that you do or you don't know that you need. But we can definitely direct things later. So for me personally, if you're having a reading with me, I think that the more you can just have your mind open to what's going to come through and try not to direct the narrative so much, you might actually get more out of it than what you think.
That's great. It's good to know, though, that you can actually ask, because I can imagine that
Mm.
actually a lot of people don't want to say anything because they don't want to feel like they've put ideas out there. They kind of want to test, don't they? I
Of
guess.
course. And I get that. And I think too, because I ask for people to be quite conversational with me throughout the reading. I don't like the stop start energy, yes, no, yes, no. I think it's just an awful way to have a reading. I prefer it to feel more like a conversation between me and you and spirit. Um, I'm telling you, if you give me any information, I will give you twice as much back. You are not giving anything away. It just sort of helps to set the scene or helps me. It's almost like while you're talking to me, so you might be going, oh my God, yes, this did happen to me, blah, blah, blah. While you're talking to me, the next piece of information's coming in. So then the conversation continues to flow. A lot of the time, I'm not really fixating on what you're saying to me. I'm just taking it as a validation. So then we can move forward and know I'm on the right track here.
That's really good to know, because I would be nervous about, asking too many questions, but I would also want to ask some specific ones. So. Can you tell people where to find you and whether they want to do a reading in person or over Zoom or wherever, and all your details?
Yes, awesome. Okay, so I'm on Instagram at Jessica Lynne Mediumship, so you can follow me there. I'm also on TikTok with the same handle, or you can go to my website www.jessicalynnemediumship.com. I do all of my one-on-one readings online, so I can connect wherever you are within the world, and I also do group readings online as well. But if you live close to Melbourne, Mornington Peninsula, I can do group readings in person as well.
Well, you heard it here, people. Give it a go. And I think your Instagram, I must say, is so delightfully refreshing. There's nothing woo-woo about anything that you seem to do. You just seem so honest and so no BS about anything. So thank you very much
Yes.
for your openness and your honesty in this conversation. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, has that convinced you?
Well, firstly, to be convinced, I think I'd actually need to do one. But I've never heard it presented like that before. She has stripped out all of the things that I imagine would put off even the merest skeptic, like all the fluff around it. There's no scene setting. And that's what I really, really enjoyed. And, when you asked about her wife being around or what's your preparation, she very much just talks about, well, actually, it's in me and I don't need to necessarily create an environment. Whereas normally I've always felt that, it needs to be a sacred space. You need to really invest in that element of it, like saging the room. And I know she uses those things as tools, but she doesn't focus that they are the necessary. It is just all in her and it's her abilities. And that was a refreshing listen, I think.
For me, similar. And I struggled with why I was feeling like I wasn't quite getting what I was after until right at the end of that conversation. And it's because for her, it's so irrefutably true and the way it is. There's no room for let's tread lightly for people who might be a bit skeptical about this. Because, like, if you're talking to me, I'm just going to assume it's because you get it and we're just going to have this conversation. And that's what really struck me at the end. Like, for her, it just is. There's no if about it. I guess I felt like I needed a bit more hand holding, and just like I really want to believe this. So I need more kind of whys and what it feels like, and this. When she talked about how to get the most out of a reading with her, and that it's totally fine to ask questions, because no matter how much information you give her, she's going to give you twice back. So it's not cheating as such. And that was, I think, when it clicked for me.
Yeah, I mean, I agree and I feel the same, but I still think a skeptic would have a problem with the absolute terminology she uses, like the lime's a genius. And there wasn't really any explanation why. And maybe it doesn't exist an explanation of why a lime would keep away an evil spirit. So I think it could go one of two ways, this conversation, couldn't it? Her absolute non-questioning, like this is just how it is, could invoke in some people like, well, okay, maybe I respect that. Or some people could be like, well, no, it doesn't prove it. Where's the proof? You can't just keep telling me this is how it is. So there is still a tiny part of me that's on that fence a bit, because that bit wasn't over-explained.
It wasn't. And I wish in a way that the conversation we had at the very end of the chat was at the beginning, because for me, there are very, very clearly two types of client that would go to a medium like Jess. And that is one that you're totally on board with it. You understand how it works. And that's just, let's see what comes up, rather than I want to know, because I wanted to know whether really is our dad sending us those red balls, for example.
I always thought it's like it was a bit of a test. You turn up and you're like, right, is she going to tell me what I want to know? But her very eloquent way of describing that, if you try and direct the narrative, it's like anything in life, isn't it? If you try and get an outcome out of something, whilst in the process, you're ignoring any other possibilities for any other paths, any other avenues. And that, of course, is going to get in the way with something like this, which completely relies on opening up other paths, other avenues. That's why you're going to her. So that was a really beautiful wrap up, I think, of how she works with the client, because it isn't just a one-way thing, is it? Because you expect, I'm going to go to a medium, they're going to tell me my destiny, they're going to tell me this. Actually, it takes a lot of willingness and openness and some connection on your part as the client as well. And I'd never really seen that that's an important back and forth.
No, neither had I, absolutely. And if I get the chance to do this again, and maybe I will do another reading with her, I will say if there's anything specifically I wanted to get out of it. Michael had just passed, my godfather. We'd both been to his funeral just a couple of days before. She mentioned a male presence, but then almost got elbowed out of the way by another one. And because I was so fixated on Dad, I didn't think of Michael, for example. I think I would have benefited from having a bit of a briefing, definitely.
What, briefing from her before?
Yes, I wish I'd heard her say, you can ask specific questions. You're not giving anything away because X, Y, and Z. It means we can explore those. Don't expect to get those answers, because it all depends on like who and what steps forward.
But then the skeptics would argue that there's the whole power of suggestion in play. If you have a briefing before it, like how much does then that inform what she can pull through? And the more you give her before, skeptics are going to say, well, you've just handed it to her on a plate. Maybe the briefing can sort of be in the moment. She's like, feel free to make this a back and forth rather than before.
Yeah, perhaps. But that's it. You've hit the nail on the head. And I think, the lady that she spoke about when we were talking about, have you ever been tricked? I don't think that lady was tricking necessarily. I just didn't think she wanted to give anything away, because if you do that, because I understand that you could feel like someone's just sort of validated something you said rather than it genuinely came from somewhere.
Oh, yeah, totally. And the temptation would be to keep stum completely. I have actually been to one before, and I was very quiet. Nothing really actually came from it, really.
It's because we don't know how to do these things properly. We're not told that it should be a conversation, and that, you know, if there is something specific.
Plus, the setup was the actual physical setup of that was the complete opposite of this. It was go into a little room with, you know, chanty music, and she was sitting there all very still, not much interaction.
Was there a crystal ball?
There were crystals, shitloads, but she was very solemn. I think that's it. All of my associations with this is this: it's very solemn, and that you have to be solemn too. At first, when Jessica was speaking, she was very upbeat, and I almost it felt really incongruous. I was like, "Hold on, no, isn't this really heavy? Isn't this really like important? What you're talking about? You kind of need to convince us here." But she's just so joyously, "This is my job."
Yes, and she doesn't need all the theatre, but that's why I was drawn to her. That's why I wanted to speak to her on the podcast, and not someone with, you know, with a crystal ball at the fair on Brighton Beach.
And the
Yeah.
coin sewn to the headscarf.
Yeah. Speaking of just being more open to things, I took a lot of comfort from the conversation where we were talking about the fact that someone with dementia could be living on the other side, and is actually quite peaceful, and it's another way of communicating with them. That really, really gave me a huge sense of relief. I don't know if it did you.
Yeah, I found comfort from it, and I can definitely get on board with that and believe that, because you know what's happening to the mind during any kind of degenerative disease like that, we see the physical symptoms, like you were saying, we see from the outside, but we actually don't know the experience. So who's to say there isn't a flow from one side to the other, like almost preparing for death? That's a beautiful thought. And what I really love about it as well, it's a non-religious thought. So for people like me who've never had the joy of believing and having a faith, it's another way to not feel daunted by disease and death. And you know, for yourself, like if this happens to you, but also, as you know, if that's going to happen to a loved one in the future. And yeah, and I find that really comforting and really important, that there is another way to look at it, rather than through religion.
Yeah, me too. And all of this can only be a good thing, surely.
What is a kinesiologist? Because she talks about this kinesiologist like she had to go. You know how psychotherapists have to have supervision. They have to have therapy themselves every week, or every, you know, regularly, you know, legally, in order to practice. Is a kinesiologist, is that person for a medium?
A kinesiologist works with your energy and can sort of tap into your energy levels, and can help you get rid of things that doesn't serve you.
So is it a form of healing therapy? Or
Yes, it is.
you're not going to connect with people? Is it more of like a Reiki kind of alternative healing?
Yes, it is. It's more like Reiki. It's much wider than Reiki, but yes, it's in that realm.
Okay.
But yeah, it's interesting that Jess has one, and probably a very good thing, because I imagine you just need to rebalance yourself a lot when you must stop thinking. You must get to a point where you're not sure what's yours and what's other people's.
See, that's the thing. And she talked about that scary entity situation, but I'm surprised that she seems quite relaxed, considering I'd feel like, isn't there a massive vulnerability if you're open to basically any spirit or entity? And that again is what I struggle with. Like, where is the switch off? Can you put up a do not disturb sign? Like, or is it just constantly going, oh, wouldn't it drive you mad? But again, she was just very chill about it all.
I think what she was saying was she's got like an open and closed shop, essentially. She's been developing her craft, like not for a huge amount of time actually, and it's actually really refreshing to see that more is coming through for her over time.
So, did you ever watch Most Haunted with Yvette Fielding and Derek Acora?
I've watched loads of them.
So that again was great, entertaining, loved it. I even went and saw it live. I sat in a chapel in East London for like 4 hours, nothing happened. But it was great, entertaining. But again, that was very much presented as an entertainment show. And then it didn't help that Derek Acora, the medium on that, was very unceremoniously and famously outed as a fake. Do you know this story?
I did not know that.
So The producer, that they have a resident skeptic on the show, and so you always got a little like talking head of him to like keep the balance and stuff, because it was everyone was really invested. They go around these locations in the dark and basically hold a seance with this psychic medium called Derek Okora, he would get possessed and he would take on these characters and voices, which is very funny. But when they started to suspect that he was actually faking the whole time, the producer wrote down the name of someone apparently who had lived in one of these locations, lived and died, this South African person called Creed Kafer. And he purposely was talking to a producer saying, oh, these are names to like listen out for, wrote it down, but purposely made it so Derek, the medium, could hear it. And it was a trap, basically, because then later on in the episode, he summons this South African called Creed, and he's, embodying him. And he's like, I'm Creed. And then it turns out that Creed Kafer is an anagram for Derek Faker. And then he was exposed to basically bullshitting, which was actually a real shame. And Yvette Fielding has said that, he's just let everyone down, and it made a mockery of the whole thing for people who, were believing and were on board. But culturally, that probably hasn't helped all of this, because that was a really famous show that was then just proven to be a pile of pants. And so in our upbringing, that's the kind of thing that got on TV. There wasn't necessarily anything to authenticate mediumship at all.
It's just a shame, isn't it? Because it is so open to fraud.
I know. And us as humans, like, especially nowadays, with the fakery of AI and everything, we are just trained to be skeptical and it's like a protective thing, isn't it? You're going to be wary of anything that's unprovable. So this is already, unfortunately for people like Jessica, you are already encountering a barrier and a resistance to it wherever you go. So in some ways, she could be having to prove herself basically for the rest of her life.
That is exactly why I didn't know what to think about this conversation, because I think that too. I don't think she does. She is, as I said before, it's irrefutable for her. And that to me is a very positive thing. It's just like, it just is.
And what lovely way to live. I guess, again, we don't touch on religion in this podcast, but I do liken it to, if you have a belief in the unseen, unprovable, but there are churches based on it, so why is this any different? Really, really.
Exactly. Well, I feel that's a good place to wrap up this conversation. I am thinking that perhaps we need a Q&A with Jess at some point in the future.
Definitely. I'm definitely going to organise a session.
So speaking of how would you do that, I guess, you can find her on Instagram at Jessica Lynne Mediumship, and she also has a website. Thank you so much for listening once again. And don't forget to let us know if you have some ideas for people that we should talk to and topics we should discuss.
Or if you yourself are an expert and want to come and have your say and let us grill you.
In the nicest possible way. Don't forget to follow us at Flock and Hive, and remember that there are articles around everything that we discuss here on our website, flockandhive.com.
And next week, we talk to Alex Kent about functional mushrooms in terms of plant medicine, not psychedelics and getting off your tits.
Not in this chat. But until then, ta-ta.
Bye.